TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Hey guys, welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm really excited about our guest, Noemi Beres, today, and she is doing something really interesting. She's an entrepreneur and business owner, excuse me, who co-owns Podcast Connections, and it's a company that helps people get on podcasts and enrich their lives through connections. I work with several podcast booking agencies as well as agents getting people on my show. It's really fascinating how this works, and she's here to talk to us all about that as well as podcast guesting. So, Noemi, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you have an interesting story and background, and a lot of people are not very familiar with podcast booking agencies, which we'll talk about. Sounds really similar to, kind of the movies and, musicians. But talk about your background and what Podcast Connections does.
Well, the whole company started in 2020. I always say that it was a birth of COVID. Before that, I had an online travel related business. So what I'm doing now is slightly different. But in 2020, we had to pivot and we started our own podcast booking agency. So that's how all it started. And by trade, I'm a linguist. I speak Danish and Swedish. So I had nothing to do with podcasts before, but it was a huge pivot, but I really enjoyed the ride. And, I learned as I went along the way, and it was interesting. We started solely work with female entrepreneurs at the beginning, and they were in the e-com world. It was really fascinating, and we started to reach out to them usually on LinkedIn, and we just started a conversation, and we started working together, and that's how we got our first clients. But then, since then, our repertoire is much, much wider than before, and we work with different clients in different niches. We have, LinkedIn experts, quantum energy experts, healers, coaches, leadership coaches, you name it. So it was a very, very interesting journey, but I really enjoy it, and I love networking people worldwide. We work around between 300 and 400 podcasts worldwide, and it's really fascinating to get to know all these interesting people.
Yeah, really interesting. And before, really I grew my outreach through direct outreach, then I found Podmatch, which is really a community. It's very easy we do podcast swaps and we help each other. And now what's really interesting is podcast agencies. So I know a lot of people are not familiar with this, but talk about, the birth and rise of podcast agencies. Are you seeing a significant growth, the big players? Talk all about that and similarities to movies, music, artists, musicians, etc.
Yeah, it's similar. It's basically a PR agency, and it's a bit similar. Then you work with artists, or you work with musicians, or you work with anyone that want you to represent them on different shows. And it's very interesting because you get to know so many people. Plus, you really have to dive deep into their professional life and into their topics because you represent them. And so you are the person who pitched them. I don't like the word, but I use it to pitch them to different podcast shows. So it's very fascinating to do this job. And there are a lot of podcast booking agencies out there in the world right now, especially since COVID. I mean, before there were a couple, but now there are a lot of them. And we just want to represent our clients and get them on the best podcast shows.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And, after COVID, I lost faith and trust in all of governments, and pretty much I realized that we are all on our own. And it's kind of like back in the Stone Age where, everybody had to, and you can't really rely on these institutions anymore.
Right.
So, which brings me to my, first question is, So kind of talk about one is the importance of researching the podcast before appearing as a guest and kind of guest etiquette and the importance of being respectful as a podcast guest. Kind of talk about that.
Yes. I mean, first of all, do your research. Always do your research. So don't just wing it. I mean, listen to some of the episodes. Like, today I listened to one of your episodes. I think it was Dr. Reverend Joycelyn, like you had an interview with her. And that was a fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed that. So try to listen at least one episode of the podcast that you'll be a guest on. I mean, that's really important. So you have a feel about the whole style and the topics that are, typically covered. And come prepared, don't wing it. Always have a clear understanding of what you want to talk about, how you want to talk about it, and always prepare some, key talking points, topics that notes that guide your conversation. So that's important. And be engaging. I mean, try to speak clearly and with enthusiasm. I mean, don't be that too formal, stiff. I mean, two people having like a conversation, like two human. And so I think that's important. Also be respectful, because this is not your show. That's the host show. So don't treat it as an advertisement. It's fine if you wrote a book, and if you have, provide a service, but the show shouldn't be about that. I mean, you should always share knowledge and provide, tell your story, share information with the listeners. It's really, really important. Be punctual. Always important, and show up. Show up when you need to show up, and don't cancel your interview the last minute, because I know the hosts are busy people and they have shows booked up all day long. So just be punctual. And, once you have the episode, once you've done it, when it's live, promote the episode. And you can promote it as many times as you want. The more is the better. Leave a review for the host on iTunes, and share it with your social media channels, followers, or like LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever you use. And then you can always repurpose the content. I mean, if you get the permission from the host, you can always repurpose that content, which helps to promote yourself and to promote the host. So that's also important. And when the interview is live, or when you had your interview, always remember to follow it up. Just send a quick thank you note by email, just to say thank you and appreciate the work the host does, because I think you all do an awesome job, and you just dedicate so much time and energy into putting into these episodes. I know a lot of you, and so I appreciate all the work you do.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I have a lot of, guest stories, and just kind of, I think like 90% of guests they're great. And then, but I think 10% is just, they may not be aware of it, or just, which is, very interesting. So next question is, talk about this idea of, so you talked about researching and, strategies for effective pre-interview research and preparation. Is there anything in particular that you talked about where you listen to the show beforehand? I know some hosts and guests are actually using ChatGPT to kind of look through the show and kind of come up with questions there. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a brilliant idea. I do that too. I do that too. And for clients as well, it's a huge help for us. ChatGPT solves a lot of problems right now when it comes to podcast guesting. And it will come up with, amazing questions. Sometimes questions that you never thought about it. So yes, that's a big help. But obviously, listening to an episode, it's important. It's not the same as just, copy pasting something into ChatGPT. Obviously, you do your research, and plus listening. I mean, to an interview, it's just important just to feel the vibe, what kind of vibe you can expect from the host, and how you can, approach this whole episode and conversation, and to be aligned with the host. I think that's important. And obviously, iTunes is always our friend, and just do some research there too. It's also important.
Yeah, you talk about so much with the alignment, and I've been studying like great interviewers such as Charlie Rose and Oprah. The Bloomberg interviewers, just kind of getting their style, and it's always like a host should. It's also important for hosts to do their research on the guests as well. And interesting is when you're on the pod match, some of the guests at their beginning or early and they don't provide much detail. So, ChatGPT can go in and kind of tease out some talking points that which you can further do your research and, lead you down the right avenue. The next question is one thing is talk about significant reasons for promoting the podcast episode after it's released and really engaging because, a lot of what I find, with guests and hosts is sometimes they just, kind of go through the motion, but they're not engaged. They won't share, they don't follow you on your socials. Kind of talk about how that hurts the social capital in there.
It does hurt indeed. I mean, and I know I tell my clients as well, just try to promote it. I mean, it's a win-win situation for everyone. You need to do it. Otherwise, you create an awful lot of content and it just sits there. You don't use it. So once because it's evergreen content, what I'm talking about right now, I can use it like for the next 2, 3, 5 years. I mean, it's going to be the same. And you miss out on so many things. Plus, when you share the content, then you tag the host and the host tags you back on social media. They're just so important. That creates even connection between the follower groups between two people. So it's just you're missing out on the power of social media if you don't promote your episodes. Plus, also missing out that you don't use a free content that is there for you. I mean, you can create audiograms, videograms, quote cards, anything, or even like you can take the transcript from there's a YouTube, for example, you can take the transcript, you can run it through ChatGPT, and you can make newsletters out of it. You can make a blog post. I mean, there are endless opportunities, especially now that we have so many options with ChatGPT too. So yeah, it's just a waste of time basically. If you don't promote it, if you don't repurpose it, it's kind of a waste of time being a podcast guest. That's my opinion.
It really reminds me of the Disney brands and the Marvel, how they've really
right.
So you can basically they've created TV series, they've created merchandise, so many different ways of reformatting, and you can share like you talked about blogs and creating short form and repurposing it. It's creatively infinite. So my next question is this idea of kind of share some key strategies for making a memorable impact as a podcast guest, because a lot of guests such as yourself, I remember I'm like, oh yeah, I remember she talked about this and she was really good. What makes a podcast guest really stand out? Just kind of just make impact audience, fun to be around, fun to talk to.
The most important thing, in my opinion, is to share your story openly and being vulnerable. Like you can tell the good, the bad, the ugly, and that's the best when you do that. If like everything is just perfect, which is not, nothing is perfect in business. But like, I had a business from 2007 to 2020, because of COVID, it just stopped and collapsed. And then that's how, Broadcast Connection started. So yes, I tell that part. Like, I failed in that business because there were some reasons that I couldn't continue with that business. But you can tell these things, and it's not shameful to tell nothing. You shouldn't be ashamed, or you shouldn't be shy about it, because that's how people learn from your experience. So the more vulnerable, the more open you are with your story and with the audience, I think the better stories and the better episodes you create.
Yeah, really, because podcasts or the guests and the audience, they want to hear something that's relatable. So if you're not relatable, for nobody's ever not failed. We've all had failures and, or just, tragedy or bad things, situations, that we're all human. So, and they want to hear about that because that helps them to relate to you, and it can create inspiration, connection, collaboration. So, I love that. We're coming to the end, but one thing I want to talk about is this idea of these long-term benefits of post-podcast activities for personal business branding. I heard this back in 2018 at South by Southwest. They were saying that podcasting is a new medium, so get on it. It was kind of like YouTube when it was young, and TikTok and Instagram. So, talk about the importance of podcasts for your personal and business branding.
I mean, yes, it's such a powerful branding tool. I mean, establishing yourself as a reputable and knowledgeable figure in your niche, in your industry, it's really helping to to develop a loyal following. And I can feel that because I've been doing podcast guesting for like almost 3 years now. And I can, feel that kind of authority that I'm building in this field. It's just really powerful that people turn to you and ask for your advice. So, and it doesn't really matter what kind of niche you are, like in the podcasting business, like I do, you can be in anything, coach or anything, but you still, as long as you are in the niche and people look at you as an authority in that field, so that shows so much and that tells so much. Plus, whenever they type your name into Google and you will come up with all those interviews everywhere, I mean, that means something, obviously, because you know something, you share something that it's important and people will listen to you and people will watch those interviews. So I think that's really powerful.
What a way to end it. Kind of, on a note, one thing that I've seen more of today now in post-COVID era is, we had this whole era of Zoom, which allowed us to do these really quick, but now I'm seeing these return of in-person podcasting. And how does podcast connections help? And if people are interested in starting out as a guest, should they just do direct outreach or work with the agency? Kind of talk about that and how your company helps them for those solutions.
Right. I mean, we provide a done-for-you service for our clients. So we do everything. You have to send out all those emails, the bios, and fill out all those forms. That's everything we do. We provide everything. We do the research. So basically, before the interview, and once we have an interview for our client, we send all the information to them. They just have to pick the time and they prepare for the interview, which is also important. And then that's all they have to do. We deal with the rest. If there's something, canceled, we reschedule. So yeah, it's a done-for-you service. So we organize everything for them. So we can, save them time, money, energy, and we provide them with consistency, because being consistent as a podcast guest, it's really, really important. Yeah, it's not enough to do. Yeah, I heard that from like potential clients. It's like, okay, I do 1 or 2 interviews, then we'll see what's going to happen. And obviously, not too many things will happen because podcast guesting is a long-term marketing strategy. So you need time to do those interviews and see the effect of these interviews.
Yeah, I started out my career as a podcast guest, and I realized that I could be of much impact if I had a host, and I could, have my show, and I could bring on guests, and I could go on my own show as well. How can people find out more about you and check out your work and reach out to you and work with you?
Sure. They can always visit our website, which is podcastconnections, plural.co, not com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you type my name in, Noemi Beres, I'm there and I'm happy to connect with you and, just get in touch with us.
And for all the audience out there, let's thank Noemi for coming on and talk about podcast guesting, her agency. Be sure to reach out to her on social, give her a like and follow. And with that, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.